What's up, everybody? This is Rafael Garcia back for the June 22nd edition of the MMA Ratings Podcast. We're back to talk about a lot of different things. The MMA Ratings is the only site where you, the fans, can actually go and rank what you thought of the fight. So if you think one is such as the Joanne Calderwood-Valerie Letourneau fight from UFC Fight Night 89, if you think that fight was spectacular, you can go and rate it and say so. If you think the Roy McDonald Stephen Thompson fight was less than what you thought it would be, you can go on the site and say so. So again, MMAratings.net is the only site where you actually have a say in how great you thought the fights were. So we're bringing back a weekly podcast to talk about all the things that are going on in the world of combat sports. So I will be with you every Wednesday. Don't have a set time yet, but we will be broadcasting, taping the show on Wednesday, broadcasting it through Google Hangouts, and going from there. So, again, I appreciate the support that we received the first time we launched this show back maybe 2 years ago. So we're bringing it back, and we hope that we catch you back, giving us your support, listening to the show, and just enjoying the content that we put out for you each and every day. So what are we going to be talking about today? We have a lot of different topics that we're going to be looking at. Of course, we're looking back to UFC Fight Night 89 from this past weekend. We'll be talking everything from Fedor to some of the big returns in GSP, Brock Lesnar, UFC Sale, Will Brooks. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics tonight. So I just want to get right into the conversation because, we want to make sure we give everything ample time. Obviously, let's look back to the event from this past Saturday, UFC Fight Night 89, where Stephen Thompson defeated Roy McDonald in the main event. This was a pretty big fight for both men. As you know, Roy McDonald decided to fight out his current contract with the UFC, and he took a gamble on himself, hoping that he would win and have some more leverage than he does. I mean, basically doesn't have any right now when it comes to bidding on his next contract. I don't think the UFC is going to allow him to go. He is, up until this point, he was the number one ranked welterweight outside of Robbie Lawler, who defeated him twice. So he was definitely very well respected within the division. There's been a lot of stories about him being upset with what he was being paid, especially that piece that came out in MMA Fighting. I believe that was back in March, when he announced that he was going to fight out the rest of his contract and not re-sign early, as most fighters do. So he took a huge gamble on himself. He came up short with losing this fight, and now he's a free agent. What happens next? We don't really know. Will the UFC let him go? I don't think they will. I think he just has too much name value, and he is someone that they can leverage in Canada, where there is a big MMA fan base. So he has a lot of value to the UFC. I expect them to negotiate with him and bring him back to the octagon, but I just don't think he's going to have the ability to ask as much as he did, as he would have if he would have been able to come out of Saturday's main event with a victory. But on the other side of that, we have a new contender in Stephen Thompson, a very intriguing one, because he's someone that's kind of, I don't want to say snuck up on the rest of the sport, but definitely when he originally came into the UFC, there were some questions on whether or not he's just going to be one of those guys who is a highlight reel and scores a lot of big time knockouts, laying a lot of guys out, but doesn't get to a point of contendership. But instead, he's proved us all wrong, and now he is the number one contender, in my opinion, to the welterweight title. Even though his record's 13-1, he's only lost to Matt Brown, and that was back in 2012. But he just completely has turned quite a different corner. And what he does from a striking standpoint is, man, it's fascinating to watch, because there isn't anyone who controls range quite like he does. Obviously, when people talk about striking in MMA, Conor McGregor's always going to come up just for what he's doing differently right now. But Stephen Thompson is someone who I believe has elevated the game even beyond what Conor does. The way he controls range and controls position is very important. I also have access to some information from Fight Metric that looks at how well he controls the octagon, and it's very interesting because he is never one who does any chasing, which means that he's not necessarily running after his opponent, throwing a lot of aggressive strikes in that nature. But he's definitely someone who is controlling the range in such a way that it's definitely frustrating to watch. You can see the frustration in his opponent's faces as they try to figure out how to create more space or create less space and be able to get him off of his game. But no one's been able to do it quite to this point in time. Matt Brown, I don't know if somehow Matt Brown's aggressiveness did it back at UFC 145, but even if they fought again, I think it would be a totally different fight. So Stephen Thompson is now, in my opinion, the number one contender to the welterweight title. He has to wait out that Robbie Lawler fight that is coming up at UFC 202, I believe, where he's facing Tyron Woodley. But in my opinion, he should definitely be the number one contender. It really isn't any other fight that would make sense. I mean, perhaps they could find a way to sell a fight between Thompson and Carlos Condit, but we all know Condit isn't coming back unless if he gets a big fight, which would be either a rematch for the belt or even say a rematch against Nate Diaz, something that has a lot of value to it. So right now, in my opinion, Stephen Thompson is the top-ranked welterweight in the division, and he is definitely someone who is a very tough challenge, in my opinion, for anyone. I think where looking at a fight between him and Robbie Lawler right now, I would have to pick Thompson as the favorite, in my opinion. That's who I would pick to win, just because what's made Robbie Lawler's resurgence so fun to watch is the fact that his aggression has been able to overwhelm most guys. He just keeps coming no matter what is thrown his way. He's found a way to use that to win. I believe he's on a 5-fight winning streak, and he's just been dominating guys, overpowering them. However, if he fights Thompson that same way, I believe he's going to get himself knocked out, simply because Thompson is so accurate and he's so hard to pin up against the cage. He's so hard to corral into an area of the cage to actually be able to unload on him. And I don't think that Lawler has the ability to cut down that space without taking a lot of damage. So that's how I would see that fight going down. Obviously, Lawler has a fight. It's at UFC 201 against Tyron Woodley to get past first. But in my opinion, Thompson is definitely a favorite over either one of those guys. Maybe Woodley would have the better wrestling to get the fight down to the ground. But again, he has to close that distance without getting the lights turned off. And right now, it doesn't look like anyone is able to do that when fighting Stephen Thompson. Another big winner from Saturday was Donald Cerrone, and even though he became the first man to stop Patrick Cote when he did it via strikes, what's the story that's coming out of this weekend? His most recent fight is the back and forth that he's having about the fighter pay. Obviously, you saw his comments during the post-fight press conference. I wrote about them for MMA Ratings and for Fansided as well, in which he basically said that he doesn't feel like shit. He feels like his services aren't appreciated when it at least isn't represented that way in his salary. And at UFC Fight Night 89, those numbers will not be released simply because it wasn't an event that was held in the United States. So you have to look back to his win over Alex Oliveira, where he won $79,000 to show, $79,000 to win, so just under $160,000, which unfortunately at this time is still a lot of money for a fighter to make for one bout. Obviously, you see some contracts out there with guys like Paige Van Zandt and Sage North Carolina getting as much as some people in Donald Cerrone's position. He has a 17-3 UFC record that doesn't include, his fights outside of. Actually, let me look at that real quick. I think it's even more than that. I think his. Let me look. Sorry for the dead air right here, but I'm definitely curious. I believe I just wrote about this earlier today, but I do believe he's fought more than that in the octagon. So since coming in to the UFC from the WEC, he has a 17-4 record, which dates back to, I want to say he came in 2000. Came back into the octagon in 2000. 2010. Donald Cerrone joined the UFC in 2011. Okay, that's right. So see, both of my first sentences were right. So since that time, he's put together a 17-4 win-loss record, and he's getting what seems to be a little bit of under 80,000 to show, 80,000 to win. So he's definitely upset with that. Dana White's response was, that even though he likes Donald, everyone isn't going to be a millionaire, basically. And on UFC Unfiltered, he talked about that situation and how he thinks that Donald Cerrone doesn't always take his career or take the fights that he has coming up seriously, which is why he loses some of the big fights, like he lost to Nate Diaz, he lost to Rafael dos Anjos. So that was an interesting response from Dana. I understand what he's saying. He also pointed out, UFC Fight Night 89 was a $900,000 gate, and Cerrone, according to Dana's comment, made $200,000. So he's making a good portion of the gate. But again, there's other extenuating factors that go into that situation as well. So you have to look at this from both sides. Cerrone's also been someone who's complained about the UFC Reebok apparel deal as well, and with him fighting so often, he's at the top of the sponsorship earnings potential. He makes $20,000 per appearance in the octagon with the Reebok branded gear. So, outside of champions and title challengers, that's the most money you can make within the sponsorship deal. But back in 2015, when the pay structure was announced, Cerrone basically went on record and said that he thinks that he may be losing anywhere from $60,000 per fight, which is a lot of money, especially for these guys who aren't making comparable salaries to other professional athletes. So it certainly is a lot of money for him to be losing every day or every fight. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. I don't know how many more fights Cerrone has on his current deal. I know he's someone that other promotions like Bellator or ONE FC would love to see, especially someone who has the ability to fight in two-weight classes. So he's someone that the UFC is going to want to keep around. And it'll be interesting to see if they can do that when his next fight contract is up. And even building on top of that, another story came out from UFC Fight Night 89 that dealt with fighter pay. Again, you had Joanne Calderwood, who won a great fight against Valerie Letourneau, and it was actually the first women's flyweight bout to ever be held in the UFC. And she basically came from she stopped Letourneau, which is something that no one else has been able to do. I think Joanna Jacek couldn't do it, and Claudia Gadelha couldn't do it as well. We look at her. Let me see. Back when Valerie fought Joanna last year in a 5-round fight too, actually, by the way, and she couldn't find a way to stop Valerie, and neither could the current number one contender, Claudia Gadelha. She actually earned a split decision win over Valerie Letourneau. So it was interesting to see Joanne Calderwood get the win via TKO in their fight, but then she went on social media and started talking about how she's currently struggling and not going to be able to make it back to TriStar because she didn't earn a fight night bonus, which was obviously, they give out the bonuses for $50,000 for performance of the night, and since she wasn't able to win that bonus, then she basically found herself in a position to where she's going to be financially struggling. Well, Dana White responded to a lot of the negative outcry that came after she did that, and she was awarded a $50,000 deal, and she was also provided a new contract. So there is a happy ending to that story. But again, she's not the only one in this situation. So it'd be interesting to see if they continue to respond to these situations in this way, because you always hear these stories about fighters struggling to make ends meet. Some fighters working 2 and 3 jobs to be able to train, to be able to pay for their corners, pay for their training partners, pay for their everything that they need for their fight camps. And some guys are working 2 jobs. Some guys are basically scraping by, living in poverty. And you see that this isn't a one-off solution. This is a trend that is going on throughout the sport. Everyone isn't making millions of dollars like Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor. Everyone isn't making hundreds of thousands of dollars like Donald Cerrone. So it'll be interesting to see how the UFC continues to respond to these situations, as I guarantee you more and more fighters who don't get these performance of the night bonuses or who don't get new contracts will turn to their social media outlets, not necessarily in a way to beg for support from the fan base, but to let more people know that this situation is real. These fighters aren't making money like LeBron James, like a Bryce Harper, or like all these other players who in other sports who are multi-million dollar athletes through and through. These guys are definitely having a hard time scraping by. Even though the UFC has changed their entry-level contracts, and they have increased over time, when you look at what these athletes are paying, not even everyday expenses, but just fight-specific expenses, you see that they really are struggling to make sure everyone is adequately paid. So it's good to see this work out for Calderwood in this way. I look forward to seeing what she does next. If she stays at flyweight, if she moves around, it'd be interesting to see what she does next. But this is still a situation that I think is not going to go away anytime soon. So other than UFC Fight Night 89, there was a lot of other news that came out throughout the week. Obviously, everyone was talking about Fedor and his fight with Fabio Maldonado, which occurred on Sunday in Russia. And even though he earned a split decision win, a lot of the storylines coming out since that victory is that maybe he should really hang it up. Obviously, this isn't the Fedor that was knocking out guys like Andre Arlovski left and right. This isn't that same man. Ever since he was stopped by, and it wasn't even the being submitted by Verdun, but it was the way he was battered by Antonio Silva, the way he was stopped by Dan Henderson. You don't know if this is the same guy. Well, obviously he's not. He's older. I believe he's 39. He isn't in the same position as he was when he reigned as a heavyweight for all those years. So with the story coming out that the UFC is really looking into bringing him in to maybe fight 1 or 2 times, we have to wonder if that's really going to be the right decision to make. Obviously, he is a name that people will people will catch on to see. I think he could be thrown onto any fight as a co-main event. I wouldn't necessarily put him as a main event affair at this point in time, but he could be thrown onto a card and made the co-main event, and people would want to watch that. People would definitely want to see what this guy has. And there are a lot of heavyweights in the UFC right now. They could easily bring someone in who could be fodder for Fedor at this point in time. Even a guy like Stefan Struve would be an interesting fight for him right now. I would definitely want to watch and see that. But on top of that, you have the return of Brock Lesnar coming at UFC 200. And if you think back, they tried to plan that fight with Fedor years back before Fedor's father passed. So there is an opportunity there, and obviously UFC is a business, so their goal is to make the most amount of money as they possibly can. The question is this is good for business, but this isn't good for it's not good for Fedor's health, and it's not good for his legacy as well. Obviously, even though he's had those speed bumps over the last couple of years, and he walked away from the sport, decided to come back, he's still remembered. I'm pretty willing to bet that people would still put him in their top 10, maybe even top 5 MMA athletes of all time. Stepping into the octagon, taking more damage, and potentially taking another loss would hurt that image, would hurt that legacy. So obviously, there needs to be some thought process into that after this fight where he barely defeated a former UFC light heavyweight, someone who wasn't even really. I think he may have reached like top 15 status once, but Fabio Maldonado was definitely not a big name that the world wanted to catch on and see. What would happen if went in there with a Stipe Miocic, Fabricio? If he fought Werdum again, he would probably lose that fight. What if he went there with a Mark Hunt? Even against a Brock Lesnar, all these fights. This isn't the same guy, so they all can't be looked at in the same way. So in my opinion, I personally don't want to see Fedor in the UFC. I get it as a business deal, but again, you never know what's going to happen. That's been a big trend lately in MMA over the end of 2015 and 2016. So that brings us to another news piece, at least in reference to big returns to the UFC. Obviously, everyone knows about Lesnar coming back at UFC 200, but you may have missed it this week on the MMA Hour. Area Hawaii guy GSP to admit that he's ready to come back to a fight. Nothing is set in stone yet, but he did confirm out of his own mouth that he's done a test camp and he's prepared to come back and fight. Right now, the name that's thrown out there is Michael Bisping, obviously because Bisping has called out GSP, but there's a multitude of problems, not problems, but question marks surrounding that. Obviously, there's the issue with GSP has been asked to go to middleweight time and time again. He's always been asked that question well before he stopped fighting, and he never seemed ready to buy into that idea of fighting at 185 pounds. There was always that super fight with Anderson Silva that was there, but it never came to fruition. Obviously, because part of it was because he didn't want to move up. So after 3 years away from the sport, why would he decide now is the time to fight at 185 pounds? Obviously, he thinks he could beat Michael Bisping, which, I could see that happening as well, too. I could see him losing to Michael Bisping, too, especially, I'm a big believer in cage rust, and that fighters will step away from the cage for an extended period of time, and they come back, they don't look the same. We just saw it with John Jones. Dominic Cruz is an exception to the rule, but we didn't see it with him. We saw it in some ways with Jose Aldo. I can continue going down the list. We see it with Cain Velasquez when he comes back. We're probably going to see it with Brock Lesnar when he returns. So, like, we saw it with Rampage. We saw it with Sean Evans. So, like, it continues to happen when guys are away from the sport for an extended period of time and don't come back the same way, especially with GSP because he suffered a knee injury while he was already retired. So, I think that's the third knee injury that he suffered. He had the two towards the end of his career, and then this one while he was already retired. So to see him, or on sabbatical, I guess is what we'll call it. But to see him come back and to think that he'll be the fighter of old, I think is asking for way too much. And on top of this, we have the potential. There are potential welterweight fights that are interesting enough. Should he fight Carlos Condit again? Should he get a shot at the title he never lost? All of these are questions that people are going to ask. Well, if he is booked against Michael Bisping, best believe I'll watch that fight. These are two guys who I believe they had the record for, they're tied right now for the record for most UFC wins. So this would be bragging rights for the victor. I have the most wins ever, but GSP could win that fight, and then Michael Bisping could win. Yeah, so that isn't really a major talking point. And then there's the idea of if Bisping wins, is he now the middleweight champion, a division that would he be champion over a division that he's never competed in? And what does that do for the rest of the group? Obviously, one of the issues that a lot of people have with Conor McGregor taking on these fights at different weight classes, that the welterweight division, where he's champion, is completely held up. This is the same thing. Is Michael Bisping's title up for grabs? If so, if GSP wins, which he can, and he could win this fight, that completely blows up the rest of the middleweight ladder. So there's so many different questions that need to be answered when thinking about St. Pierre coming back to competition. But again, it's a big story. People are going to be interested in fighting, or interested in watching him come back to fight. There hasn't been any date, no potential opponent or anything like that. But right now, it looks like he is coming back to compete. And another, probably the biggest story that we're going to be following is the news surrounding the UFC sale. Now, this is, I was actually having a conversation about this earlier today about the way it's being covered. Obviously, everybody isn't touching this story. On one side of the equation, you have Jeremy Bonner on Flow Combat, who produced a piece today that basically says that the sale is all finalized, and that it is expected to be announced sometime during International Fight Week, which is when the UFC has those three big events with UFC 200 that weekend. And, he doesn't name any sources, obviously, because he shouldn't, but he often points back to sources who have filled in the blanks for this developing story. When it was initially mentioned, I think back at the start of May, or maybe towards the end of April when the story first came out, Dana White, as he obviously does, immediately lampooned the guy from ESPN who first reported it about how the story was a false, and then more and more information started coming out, which obviously showed that he wasn't telling the complete truth. And even with this Flow Combat piece, there was a story on a report on Sherdog that talks about UFC Zuffa memo that was sent out by Lorenzo Petita, basically denouncing the Flow Combat piece. So there are a lot of swirling aspects to the story. I haven't written about it per se yet, just because I kind of want to see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC was up for sale. One thing I am working on is a piece on why MMA fans need not worry. I find it very interesting that the knee-jerk reaction has been, "Oh my God, I can't imagine the UFC without Zuffa, without Dana White, without the Petitas." I understand that sentiment and I get it, but I don't like. This isn't the MMA of 2000, of the early '90s, where it was about to be a dying sport MMA is in a totally different space right now, and having a different ownership that has a different reputation about them can help the sport grow. Obviously, Dana and the Fertitas have done monumental amounts of positive work for mixed martial arts as a whole. They've done so many things that I could spend a whole night just talking about the benefits that they've done for the sport. However, our reaction shouldn't be, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever going to happen. The UFC is going to die now. That is not the case. The group that is supposedly uh, leading the charge for this purchase is William Morris IMG, who is led by Ari Emanuel. I don't know if you know, but Ari Gold from Entourage is quote unquote based off of Ari Emanuel, but he's someone who has a almost I can't even high level isn't a good enough term to describe how effective a businessman he is, especially in the sports and entertainment world. So to see him and the Kraft family, which is obviously the family that owns the New England Patriots, to be kind of like the North American ownership face, and then the group of the other half of the investment group is based in China, two different organizations there, which are two very powerful groups who would help the UFC establish a foothold within China, which is basically the largest untapped market that they haven't been able to reach into at this point in time. So that is a benefit for not only the UFC, but mixed martial arts as a whole in the East, which is very important for them in the growth of their company and the growth of the sport. Will this benefit fighters? We don't know. One thing I think is that if a sale does go through and financial information is released, it will be interesting to see, the total number of or the total revenue numbers that the UFC generates. How is that money allotted? What are their expenses like? Because right now, they don't have to talk about any of that, and they don't. So we don't know what percentage of their revenue is going to fighter pay, or going to different situations, going to insurance, going to promotion, going to marketing. We don't know those situations right now, but it'd be interesting to see because that information will be revealed through the sale. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, one of the biggest aspects of this sale to watch. But in my opinion, fans shouldn't be hitting the panic button, shouldn't be hitting the eject button, just as they've done for years before the Ultimate Fighter, after the Ultimate Fighter, and as mixed martial arts has become more of a mainstream sport, they should continue to support the sport and the fighters. So we're going to turn a little bit and talk about Will Brooks. I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to Brooks's interview on the MMA Hour this past Monday, but it was definitely extremely very powerful. If you don't know, Will Brooks is the former Bellator lightweight champion who was released from the organization. He was upset with where he was, within the company. He wasn't well promoted. He was just there, obviously, and he talked to Ariel because he was recently signed to the UFC. He's going to fight Ross Pearson. I believe it's July. I want to say the 8th, maybe July 8th, but he's fighting Ross Pearson as his first fight in the octagon. And before I get on to the interview, in my opinion, I think Will Brooks, definitely has the potential to be a top 10 lightweight, maybe even higher. Is he better than that? Yeah, in my opinion, yes. I think he will be trouble for a lot of guys. I could see him defeating someone like an Anthony Pettis, defeating an Eddie Alvarez. I could see him really because he has a mix of wrestling, he has a mix of length, a mix of striking that I think can go well. And oftentimes, we look at guys coming over from Bellator and thinking that they're not the same level as UFC fighters. But remember, we said the same thing about guys coming from the WEC, and look how that worked out. We said the same thing about guys coming from Strikeforce. Look how that worked out. So I think Will Brooks definitely is someone that has a lot of potential to make a lot of noise within the UFC. I wrote a piece about that for MMA Ratings this past week, or last week actually, so definitely go back and check it out. But if you have the opportunity, listen to his interview with Ariel from this past Monday, where he talks about a lot of dark things. He talks about what it was like to be a struggling fighter trying to make it in the sport. And in listening to him talk about it, I was thinking, and maybe he was talking, when he first came into the sport a long time ago. He's been fighting for, let's see, Will Brooks has been a professional fighter since 2011, so for 5 years. And he's put together a 17-1 record, so he's been staying active, staying very productive. The one loss he did have to Saeed Awad back in 2013, he got that win back that same year. So he's done his due diligence. But to hear him talking about, not only was he close to walking away from the sport, but he almost committed suicide. He talks about how he walked into traffic, hoping to get hit by a car, and how a lady almost hit him, and the whole awakening moment that he had from that point. He talks about a lot of the people that had his back and helped him get from point A to point B to get to this point in his career where he's finally fighting on the biggest stage for the biggest promotion within the sport, but how he almost didn't make it here. And listening to him, man, it's amazing because this kind of loops back to Joanne Calderwood's story and even a Donald Cerrone's story about fighters who are struggling so much with the burden of becoming a professional mixed martial artist without the and I'm going to use the word promise, but I don't necessarily mean promise itself, but without knowing it, a lot of us out there doing it on faith and not knowing that even if they reach this level, are they going to be making enough money to make ends meet? Are they going to be making enough money to survive? And Brooks is a married man. He has a daughter, I believe. So listening to this story, it was definitely it was gut wrenching. He broke down. He got very emotional a couple of times during the interview. But to hear him talk about the depression he was in and how close he was to committing suicide was definitely it was powerful. So I want to read a little bit from what he said. What did he say? He said, I slept in my car for a year and a half trying to make this happen. I've had a lot of ups and downs. I shouldn't be here right now. I went through a lot of dark times. I thought about putting myself into the ground a few times, but I'm here. So he goes on to tell more about the story. Then he says, we've been through a lot. We had to sacrifice a lot, but we still had to find a way. We've had a lot of ups and downs, and to say that I'm one of the people in my family to battle through and still be here, I can't put it into words. This is a story that I've never told anyone, but I'll tell it because I want someone to be able to find something in my story to help them through. There was a time when I gave up. I tried to walk into traffic. I tried to walk into a busy intersection in Illinois in my life. That was a scary time for me, but things just got so hard. I felt like I was wasting space, like I was taking up air. I was so embarrassed and ashamed of myself. I just took it and it said, you need to get your, I think he said shit together. It didn't get easier, but I refused to go down, and that's why I'm here today. So again, not even if you're an MMA fan or not even if you're a Will Brooks fan, this is one of those stories that definitely you should hear. So have the time, go back and listen to Ariel Hawani talk to Will Brooks on the MMA Hour. It was definitely some powerful stuff from this week. It makes me root for him even more. So obviously, I'm always on this podcast. I'm going to talk about other aspects of combat sports and some things that may catch my eye. As you know, I'm a fan of boxing. I'm a fan of wrestling, grappling, obviously, and professional wrestling. That's kind of how I got into mixed martial arts as a whole. So I want to talk about some of the other stories that are going on in the world of combat sports. Two kind of caught my eye right now is that the fact that Triple G and Canelo have agreed to fight. They're not going to fight until 2017, but at least they have agreed to fight. And this is important because for a while there, it looked like this was going to be this generation's version of, or the next generation's version of Mayweather Pacquiao, where the two best guys, continue to go back and forth, never get into the ring together. These two guys have committed to getting into the ring together in the fall of 2017. Dan Raphael of ESPN.com reported it first that they're going to fight at 160 pounds. Between now and then, both guys will probably take 1 to 2 other fights before then, but this is definitely something that I don't watch too many boxing matches right now anymore. I need to get back into the habit of that. I used to watch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays in the big fights. I just kind of gotten away from that. But these are two guys that I'll stop and watch. So I hope this comes true. This is one of the biggest fights this is the biggest boxing match that can be put on right now. I'm looking forward to it and I'm excited. Another story that came out this past week was Roman Reigns. Obviously, people may not. He is a member of the WWE, big time professional wrestling star. He's a former champion, but he was actually suspended for failing the wellness test on Tuesday, which really came out of left field because he just lost the heavyweight title to. He lost the heavyweight title this past Sunday at Money in the Bank. But he was supposed to be a part of the triple threat main event at Battleground, which is in July, which I'm going to, and I cannot wait. But he was suspended for wellness policy. They haven't mentioned what drug he was found in his system, but 30-day suspension. Those 30 days will be up before the Battleground pay-per-view, so he should still be back for that. But it'll be interesting to see the way the WWE writes him out of stories for 30 days and throws him back in. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye out on that. It's not a major story. Obviously, I want to talk about pro wrestling on this podcast, whether you like it or not. But this is definitely something that we should keep an eye out on, and it's a story worth watching. So we have some questions that I got earlier in the week, and I'm just going to jump into these and knock them out. So first one is how excited should we be about UFC 200? I think this is a great card. It features Brock Lesnar in the co-main event, John Jones and Daniel Cormier as a main event. I haven't even really started talking about that yet. But obviously, they're in the main event. Brock Lesnar was the co-main event facing against Mark Hunt. You have you have Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes for the women's bantamweight title. Then you have Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar fighting for the featherweight title. So, yeah, that alone is reason to watch. But then you look at what else the card has to offer, and this is the rest of the card, but you have Cain Velasquez and Travis Brown, Gegard Mousasi and Thiago Santos. You have Johnny Hendricks and Kelvin Gastelum, TJ Dillashaw, Rafael Sunsao, Joe Lozon, Diego Sanchez, Takanori Gomi, Jim Miller, Kat Zingano, Juliana Pena, and Sage Northcutt, and Enrique Marin. This is a hell of a card. From top to bottom, there aren't any fights here you want to miss. There aren't any bathroom breaks. If you ever wanted to introduce someone to MMA and sit them down in front of a card that they can watch from top to bottom, this is definitely it. So, yeah, UFC 200, you should be excited. You should look forward to it. It's going to be a big night. Watch it at home because bars are going to be packed. people going to be charging covers. This is definitely the type of fight that you want to, the type of fight night that you want to see from start to finish. Next question is Wonder Boy a real contender? I already answered that question earlier. I see him as a favorite over both Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley. I don't think he should have to face any other fighters before getting a title shot. I think he's the number one contender, and I think he's someone that we may see as a champion before the year is out. Maybe before the year is over or early next year, depending on what the winner of the Lawler versus Woodley fight does. But he's definitely someone who I believe is a real contender, someone who I can see walk away from the title. Walk away with the title, excuse me. Also, I wanted to talk about Bellator 156. I had a question about Michael Venom Page and if he's really exciting and worth watching. In my opinion, Bellator does have a number of fighters that are exciting. I do like a number of the guys on their roster, and Michael Venom Page is certainly one of them. He is going to fight at Bellator 156, which is set for. I'm sorry, it's Bellator 1. Where's he fighting? I know he just had a fight announcement. Let me see. $158. That's when he's fighting. So it's in July. On July 16th, he's fighting Evangelista Santos. This is his toughest fight to date, but he's definitely someone that fans should sit down and watch. He's definitely exciting. People compare him to Anderson Silva. I'm not going to go as far out to say that, but he is someone who I think is worth watching, worth stopping to see. There really is Paul Daly, Douglas Lima is the main event of that fight. And that's also another fight I wouldn't mind watching. I'll probably sit down and watch that fight as well. But if I sit down and watch 158, it'll definitely be because of Michael Venom Page. He's someone that the UFC is probably going to go after when his contract is up. But until then, enjoy watching him highlight real fools over in Bellator MMA. So I wanted to say thank you again for listening to our show, checking us out you can catch us on YouTube. We will promote the show on MMARatings.net. I will obviously promote the show. You can follow me on Twitter at rgarcia_sports. Again, that's rgarcia_sports, where I'll be talking MMA, basketball, football, sports in general, maybe some life stuff every now and then. I'll throw some of that crap out there too. But MMARatings.net, where you can rate the fights, tell us how you feel about each and every fight, and let the world know this is the only site where you're able to do that. Be sure to follow us at MMARatingsNet on Instagram and Twitter as well. Like the Facebook page. Definitely go and check out the content that myself, Adam Martin, Michael Ford, we have a great interview up there with Matt Mitrione as well. So there's a lot of good content that comes out on a daily basis. So be sure to go check us out. Thank you for your time. We'll be back next week to talk more MMA and any other news that comes out from the world of combat sports. Thank you and have a great night.